So thanks for coming, folks with the Religious and Socialism Working Group. Um, Working groups are a part of DSA, and I'm a part of, my name is Duane Campbell. I'm a part of the Immigrant Rights Working Group. I will be sharing with you today as a part of the panel. And the second on the person in the panel is Eddie Chavez Calderon. Eddie, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm calling in from Phoenix, Arizona, on native territory and land. So happy to be here with everybody. I am the director of Arizona Jews for Justice, and I lived most of my life undocumented. I currently have DACA right now, and it's been one of our enormous honors to be able to support hundreds of thousands of asylum seekers here.
Thank you. So to begin our program, I'm going to share a screen, and what I want to show you is some slides at the border. And then Eddie will be talking more extensively about the border. Let's see. Those are my grandkids, if you can see that. Let's see. Oh, we got a problem here. Okay. So our plan for today is here. We're going to start with some of the issues. Then Eddie will be going into more detail on the problems at the border. And then depending on the time available, we'll go into Biden's promises on immigration and the current proposals. And it's of particular importance to us that we allow time for questions and responses. We really look forward to your questions, and we will try to respond to them as best we can. But if you have a question, you have a question and answer tag at the bottom of your screen, please enter it there. Many of us have been seeing these scenes from the border. Of course, lots of the scenes can't be seen because there's a lot of restrictions. The Border Patrol is restricting people from getting in and taking pictures of what's going on. But we just wanted to remind you a little bit of what's going on at the border. These are young boys who are held in cages and sleeping on the floor. This is in a Border Patrol station. This is very common at the present time. You've probably seen this photo before because it got on national news. This young boy was found wandering in the desert, lost, and was asking for help because he had been abandoned by the people who he'd crossed the border with. He was picked up by the Border Patrol after this. And this is just a scene from people trying to cross the border. It's often women and children. I'm going to now go to another series of slides. Let's see, how am I going to do that? I'm gonna have to go get some slides, so I'm gonna have to go through this slideshow. I have an issue with how my.
Hey, Duane.
Yeah.
Do you mind changing your name on your Zoom? Go to the little dots on top of the corner near your video, and
I will in a minute. At present I'm on a page where I can't do that, but thank you for that. I'm trying to get beyond that. Trying to get back here. So I want to close this. And thank you on that. I'm going to get that in just a moment. And then I want to go here. This is a slideshow by a group called Franciscans for Justice. And just some of the faces of what's happening at the border. This is March 21. An asylum seeker from Guatemala with their daughter was supported in a local shelter. Local communities have been trying to help people in the shelters, and they're stretched very thin. This is another woman who was faced abuse and persecution in Honduras, and she did receive asylum in the US and presently works as a fashion designer. Her testimony says she only had two choices: leave Honduras to live or stay and die. These are children and adults at the border with a community worker approaching them to help them. Guatemalan mother, a 3-year-old girl. She just collapsed with exhaustion when the community worker came to help her. This is a brief photo of a woman saying, "I did not make it." She had tried to get across the border. Her husband is presently in Chicago, so she would have a sponsor in the US. This is an older photo from a Salvadoran who came, and her view was, you either make it alive, you don't know if you're going to make it alive at the end of the day. She is presently resettled in Dallas, Texas. I'm going to go beyond that one, and then I'm going to stop sharing. And Eddie, yes, you want me to change my name, rename. What name is on there? Oh, my name is panelist, huh? Thank you. Okay, Eddie, go ahead and tell us more about your experience in the border.
Definitely, thank you for that slide. I think it's important that we visualize a lot of what's happening, because oftentimes we fall victims into just looking at numbers, and that often leads into the following the same rhetoric of dehumanization of migration. So to see the pictures of people and truly in a raw statement, in a raw form, is so crucial and vital to our existence of advocating for immigration reform, and really in the struggle of what it means to advocate for folks. Like I said in the beginning, we have been working here at Arizona Jews for Justice, really since we saw the spike of asylum seekers in 2018, and have not stopped since. We have obviously been deterred from some of the previous administration's policies in what border migration looked like. But it's very interesting to see that as a child, I was in a detention center when I was young. And the fact that nothing has really changed is kind of disturbing to see that as a 4-year-old child, now I'm 24, 25, that literally nothing has changed. That the migration process is just as awful and horrific as it was when I was a child. We were seeing stories of the exact same thing happening, where we know that Border Patrol agents are acting in inhumane ways, are abusing their power. Border Patrol agents are almost retaliating with ICE, and we understand that they have kind of an issue with each other, where they don't communicate. Oftentimes here in Phoenix, we'll see that we'll get back and forth and total miscommunication between both agencies onto when folks are going to be dropped off. We're still seeing that folks are being dropped off randomly at a Greyhound bus station here in Phoenix, Arizona. And could you imagine just being dropped off in a place where you don't speak any English, you don't have any funds, and you're just told good luck? Horrific. And it's still happening. And I think it's important to call out that it's still happening under a so-called progressive administration, that the same policies are being upheld. The same processes are literally textbook to what we saw in 2020 and in the past 4 years. It's the identical processes. So it's really disheartening when we try to advocate for immigration reform and try to advocate for these families. We have to do it just not when it's palatable and on the news and it feels right to go against what seems to be the oppressive regime. We should do it continuously because we fully understand that these systems oftentimes are heard that they're saying like, you know what, the system is broken. I don't think they're broken. I think they're working as effectively as they are meant to work. These systems are worked to dehumanize people, to deter people, to make it the most awful experience possible. When we see people off of the ICE bus, they're literally shaking. And folks are coming off of the ICE bus in shackles, my friends, in shackles. The first thing we do when folks are released is we take off their, we give them little bands so that they can put around their wrist and clean the area, give folks ice, give folks water so that they can alleviate the pain. Imagine that. For the simple crime of seeking asylum, that is so-called a crime now, they're put in shackles. And now even worse with the COVID pandemic, what we'll have from various agencies, we'll have different people that will let us know, you know what, there may be somebody who's COVID positive. So then our entire team in partnership with community agencies is now at risk. We all now have to assume that everybody is COVID positive because everybody's brought in on a bus. So, I mean, we have so many different challenges that are new, but so many horrific challenges that are unfortunately the same, that are unfortunately the same and have not changed, which I think is just a vital thing to change the rhetoric that migration is not a crisis, mis amigos. Migration has never been a crisis. Migration is oftentimes why the human race is alive because of the migration process. It's never been a crisis. What is in doubt our crisis is how we respond to the migration. So Duane, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak and share a little bit about the current border issues and the releases of asylum seekers, as we know that the horrific treatment is still continuing.
And for all, remember to please use the question and answer session. If you have questions, particularly about border related issues, please put them in there and we will try to respond to them. I'm going to go back to a little bit of a share screen and provide a little bit more there. We're readjusting our schedule a little bit because of the way question and answers are going to work. So please get your questions in. Otherwise, we would just keep talking, and we'd rather not do that. We'd rather not do that. So let's see. Oh, I gotta do this again. Okay. I'm going to skip through some slides while I get to where I want to be. You've seen these slides before. That's expensive. I just wrote this one down. This is a recent statement by the Pope. He has a recent encyclical letter out about the role of refugees and the need for all societies to welcome them. For understanding of what's going on right now, think about that Biden, when he was candidate, said, here's what he said, this is what he would do in 100 days. And we're now at day 90, I think, 91. He said he would end separation of children and their parents at the border. He said he would reinstate the DACA program, which is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival, which Eddie benefited from, and you can ask about that. He said he would restore the asylum processes that had been ended by Trump. He said he would stop the funding of the wall. He said he would restore temporary protected status for workers. That's a very important ingredient. And he said he would end the travel ban on persons from Muslim countries, and that he would propose a major immigration reform plan to Congress, which includes H-2A and H-1B. So there has been a bill introduced called the DREAM Act, which would provide a path towards citizenship for Dreamers or DACA recipients. It would also, it's now called the Dream and Promise Act, would also provide a path towards citizenship to those presently holding temporary protected status. It's important to understand temporary protected status, because when you hear about the border and unaccompanied minors crossing the border, and then they're arrested and held by the Border Patrol, what they're being held for is to be released to people in the United States who could be their sponsors. And many of those people are people with temporary protected status. So this would be a person from Honduras who's been here for 10 years. It might be a brother, it might be an uncle, might be anybody. And that's who they would be released to. And that's called temporary protected status. And making that permanent is in the current Dream and Promise Act, which passed the House of Representatives and is presently in the Senate. And it passed the House of Representatives on a totally partisan vote. I think there were only 5 Republicans voting for it. There is also a major bill that's passed called the Farm Modernization Workforce Act, which is important to understand because it's rather complex. Its goal is to provide a path to citizenship for farm workers who are currently living in the country illegally. That would be about 3 million people. And in the Republican-led, all the Democrats voted for it except one, and 34 Republicans voted for this. The reason for the difference is this has agricultural grower support. And so they were able to get 34 Republicans on their side. In this Farm Modernization Workforce Act, which has passed the House and is at the Senate, as it said, Title I is a new title. It said it would secure temporary work status for domestic agricultural workforce. So if you are presently working in a farm or in agriculture, you would get a temporary status for 5 years. It's renewable for another 5 years. And importantly, unlike past things, you can also bring your family and dependents. It has a provision that says you must stay in the US for all but 90 days per year after your renewal. Or no, after your renewal, that is after 10 years, you can apply for permanent resident status. So a farm worker who came through this system could apply for permanent resident status. It has Title II, which is very important to think about, and many immigrant rights groups, including the Immigrant Rights Committee Working Group of DSA, opposes this title. It is a revision of what's called H-2A, the temporary workers and agricultural workers. We have many articles on this called Close to Slavery. It has some of the same conditions as the existing prior legislation. There has been a massive expansion of H-2A temporary workers brought to the United States during the Trump administration. I believe now there's over 400,000. And then there's another bill that has been introduced but hasn't been voted on. This is the Citizenship for Essential Workers Act. That would provide a path to citizenship for essential workers, and it has not been voted on by either house. The agricultural workforce bill has been passed by the House and is waiting in the Senate. This is how you can get a hold of us. You can get a hold of the Immigrant Rights Working Group by sending an email to immigrants@dsacommittees.org, and we'll be happy to plug you into things that are going on. And I thought I had one more thing I wanted to hear, but I guess not. Let's see. So that's the present. I want to stop share here. So that's the present legislative proposals. And I should have left them up there, but if you go through those, yes, the building of the wall has been stopped. Yes, DACA has been extended. It hasn't, the law hasn't changed. What has happened is Biden has extended the DACA, the right of Dreamers to stay here on temporary assignment. The legislation, the Dream and Promise Act, would make that permanent. And yes, he has ended the Muslim ban. And yes, he has extended TPS, temporary protected status, for most of the members who have that. Although I understand the Haitian one is outstanding because Trump had canceled that before he left office. Biden has introduced so-called comprehensive legislation, but that's going nowhere. So the two bills that are going somewhere are the ones that we've been that I just went over. You have any comment, Eddie? I'm going to go look at this question thing. Okay. Questions. What
Yeah, there's a
specific?
couple of questions.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I can address the first question. What specific proposals do you advocate in supporting refugees at the border? I think there needs to be an abolishment of the Remain in Mexico policy that's just been horrific. That's just been hurting so many families. Title 41 is just awful, and we need to really go back on that. That's an awful way of taking a step back into really how we can sustainably and humanitarianly help and support families. We know that Mexico is not safe. Mexico is not safe. So to push your families to remain in a place where it's not safe is just inhumane. So that's my answer for that question. Duane, you want to take the next question from Frank?
Yeah, thanks, Frank, for asking. It's an important question. His question is, what broader programs should be taken in Central America and beyond to support folks remaining in their community without fear and some sense of economic security? Okay. Well, the Biden administration has proposed $4 billion of development aid to the Triangle, the Northern Triangle countries. And that's the same kind of proposal, but with more money that happened under the Obama administration. They never got it spent because the Obama administration was replaced by the Trump administration. There's some serious, so that's a good idea that we need economic development. And particularly because of the ecological crisis, for many reasons, including the ecological crisis. Many of the refugees from Honduras and Guatemala, in Honduras specifically, they're fleeing two devastating hurricanes recently, and they've had hurricanes before. That's how TPS actually got started, was a way to relieve pressure from hurricanes. And in Guatemala and the highlands, there is a very severe drought, which is driving people out of Guatemala. People don't have the wherewithal to feed their families. Now, there's problems with that aid. The aid has good intentions, but the governments of those countries are incredibly corrupt. And so much of the past aid went to the militarization. It went to training troops in Guatemala to defend the border, to try to stop people from crossing from Guatemala into Mexico. So we would need a new form of aid that doesn't go through the governments of those countries, which are dominated, they're oligarchies dominated by very repressive old guards. If you know the history, well, for example, in 2009, the people of Honduras elected for the first time a halfway decent president. And in 2011, he was overthrown by the military, and the US and Hillary Clinton supported that overthrow. And since that time, you've had essentially a military government, although they have elections, but the elections are essentially fraudulent. So the idea of supporting development in the Central American countries is absolutely an important one. We have to be demanding that it go to the people, not to the governments and the corrupt. By corruption, we mean corruption in every sense of the word. Who gets hospitalization? They're heavily laced with drug trafficking. The brother of the president of Honduras is under indictment for high-level drug indictment. So this is a very serious problem. And don't think that the United States doesn't know about it. If you remember in the Trump administration, when he had, trying to think, his first director of DHS, the general, that general had been in charge of the Central America Command for the previous 3 years. In other words, he was sitting in Honduras watching the corruption, and then he got in charge of our policy and continued the corruption. So yes, Frank, you're at the right direction, but with a lot of caveats about how that would have to be done. Do you want to try the next one, Eddie?
Yeah. I think that thanks to Juliet for this question, and it's I think I'm gonna go ahead and read it. I guess my question is, what would it be that you actually think Biden will deliver on, and where do you need to push hard? Some promises are already broken, like no more inches off the border wall. Right. And I think that this also goes kind of into the next question that Gail asked, where we saw that the Biden administration uptook the same refugee numbers to be accepted into the United States that the Trump administration did. And then so communities across the United States put pressure immediately. And we're like, what in the world is happening? You're following the same exact ridiculous number. And what did we see? After everybody across the nation uproared, we're talking faith communities, community organizations, every single person uproared, and they went back on it, right? They're like, okay, well, sorry. And the public backlash was immediate. So I think that we need to keep holding that type of pressure, where everybody's united and calling them out and saying, you know what, you made these promises and these promises are not really being met, right? We understand that DACA is still under attack. It's still in the courts right now, threatened. So we're still kind of pawns in this play right now, my friends. We're still vulnerable. A lot of the families are still vulnerable. Our friends of TPS are still vulnerable. So we need to pass legislation like the Dream and Promise Act. And for that, we need to put pressure on our elected officials very heavily. Here in Arizona, unfortunately, we have two that have been very flippy. We have one that has a history of being very flippy. So the pressure has to be collective, and it has to be a very forceful reckon, right? Where it leads from direct action, phone baking, and if needed, civil disobedience to make sure that we pass this. Because right now we have a very clear roadblock with some of our politicians that we would think ideally would be on our back are actually not. So it goes more than just holding Biden accountable. It's also holding those progressive folks that we thought were progressive accountable as well, collectively.
Just to add a little to that, we in the Immigrant Rights Working Group are supporting, and our allies are supporting many locations. There's going to be demonstrations on May Day, and in Chicago and Washington, D.C. and elsewhere. And Raices is organizing many of those, and Cosecha is, and we're supporting them. We worked very well with Raices and Cosecha during the campaign to defeat Trump. So we're working cooperatively with people. There will be demonstrations in the street May 1st. You might want to check your local areas to see if there's demonstrations planned in your area. Also, in that where I gave you the address that you can get in touch with us, we in the Immigrant Rights Working Committee have what's called a resource folder, and what we've collected is materials for the last 4 years. Like, because as you may know, the immigrant rights struggle is very different in different parts of the country. I live in California, which is a sanctuary state, and my city is a sanctuary city. Our battle is different than what's happening along the border. So there's materials on the various different sorts of things. For example, just last week, we got an allocation like the COVID support allocation. We got it for undocumented workers in California. It's only $600, but all around the rest of the country, except for New York, the undocumented got nothing out of that, and we're getting them at least $600. So the issues vary in different parts of the country, and then there are the national issues. Also, on the national issues, we in the Immigrant Rights Working Group are very worried about that Farm Modernization Workforce Act, because it does include a bracero or guest worker program. You could argue both ways on that. I understand the arguments on both sides of that, but basically, those workers get abused terribly. The vast majority of them now are indigenous people from the south of Mexico and from Honduras, the Triqui speaking and various Puro Quechua and other indigenous people from the deep south of Mexico and on in across the border into Guatemala. And it's almost like the old coal mines when you had a company town. A person, the corporation is in charge of these people. Now there's a great opportunity, well, there's positive phrasing in the guest worker program. The problem is those laws aren't enforced. The growers do what they damn well please. So for example, there is a piece of that guest worker program that would allow, I think it's 10,000 H-2A workers a year to move from being guest workers to getting a blue card or a regular migrant card. But the corporation, the company has to recommend who gets it. Well, that's going to be used to abuse, it's going to be used to only pay off the people who go along with the corporation. It's going to be another way to exploit workers. Eddie, do you want to look at this one by Frank, or do you want me to look at it?
No, yeah, Frank, that's a great example. And some like direct action that we've been also doing here is targeting the organizations that are displacing people. We know that right now, ICE is actually putting families back into hotels. They're putting back families back into hotels. So our community is looking at, like, what are these hotels? What are these hotels that are benefiting from the suffering of our people? What are these hotels, and how can we create an action item that would stop them, that would a protest outside of these hotels? Because we know that that's worked previously here in Arizona. And what we are really upset is with the fact that we have a welcome center here in Arizona. We have multiple shelters here in Arizona who are more than happy, ready, structured, and able to assist families in a transparent way that comes from community efforts, that does not come from the government. So that we know that right now families are being diverted into these hotel rooms. And while they're in the hotel rooms, they're technically still under custody. And in Spanish, there's a famous saying that the jaula, aunque sea de oro, sigue siendo jaula. That the cage may be of gold, but it is still a cage. And that is not what we want. That is counterproductive of what we want. So direct action would be to find these places that are still putting people under detention, even if it's in a hotel room that is improperly staffed, that does not have the transparency of a community-run organization and platform. That is huge. So Frank, I completely agree with you, and we need to come together. And I think it's so beautiful that you mentioned that multi-faith groups were in this. And I think it's such an important thing to highlight, that the majority of the action items here and what's going on here is because it's a plethora of support from multi-faith, multi-ethnic groups that are coming together to support peeps. And that's something beautiful within itself, of the community organizing that has come from this.
And so just to add a little bit to that, so in terms of this conference today, one thing that faith activists, you don't have to be a leader in it, but faith activists could do is try to get their religious organization, or even 5 people in your local parish or assembly or whatever organization you belong to get active pressuring legislators to pass good legislation, which would be what used to be called a comprehensive immigration bill, but we want a good one this time, that includes everybody. Our demand is there's 11 million people here, and we want them here now. Incidentally, or directly related, so one part of the answer is move faith communities and individuals motivated by faith to direct action. I have a concern, and Eddie, you may be able to clarify this for me, but what's happening at present, the reason for the incredible backlog of people who are mostly children who are on this side of the border now is because the Biden administration hasn't changed the rules around asylum. The rules of asylum are, the internationally recommended rules of asylum are that if a person arrives at your nation and requests asylum, they have a right to a hearing, they have a right to food and shelter, and they have a right to be heard. That's not happening. It's not happening because, I think you called it Rule 41. It's not happening because during the Trump administration, they used COVID as an excuse and said, oh, we can't do that. We can't allow these people in. But that's what international law requires. However, I want to, for those of us in the struggle for the long haul, I want to urge you also to be wary that even if we get the asylum rules fixed and we get the asylum process fixed, don't think that that solves this problem, because asylum judges are judges of the Immigration Service, and they decide a very high percentage of people who apply for asylum don't get it. People that you and I think would deserve asylum, the judge says no. So it is great to demand that the asylum procedures be reestablished, but don't think that resolves the problem. The problem, what that does is give people a year or two in the country in order to make their case, but a very large number of those people who apply for asylum will eventually be denied. Also, I would urge people to plug in with your environmentalist friends, because part of this problem is an environmental problem. There's an awful lot of environmental refugees arriving here, and we need to resolve this for now. But I'm cautioning you that throughout the world there is going to be environmental migration. Migration is happening, and so we need to develop policies to deal with environmental migration, because we're not resolving the environmental problem. You're still going to have hurricanes, you're still going to have droughts, you're still going to have people without enough food to eat. And so I would encourage people to contact their local eco-socialist people and try to work together on this, because the two issues come together.
Definitely. And I think that it's so asylum is so difficult, right? It's one of the hardest immigration from lawyers' mouths. Hundreds of lawyers that I've worked with have talked about how difficult it is to win an asylum case, because applicants must provide that they were persecuted on account of at least one of 5 protected grounds: race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or a particular social group. But the thing is that folks are expected to bring in a plethora of extensive proof of these claims. I even had one of the most emotional stories I've heard was this woman. It was a young mom who reminded me of my mom when I crossed the border, a young single mom. And as I was listening to her, I was booking her flights for her to be reunited with her family. And she was in tears, and I was like, is everything okay? And she started to explain to me how the Border Patrol agents, she said, are monsters. I said, why? She said, they said that my claim was not real. And she said, look at my baby.
Yeah.
As she showed me her baby that had a bullet wound. Then she proceeded to show me she lifted up part of her shirt to show me that near her hip, she had a bullet wound. She said, this is what happened to me and my family. My husband was murdered. I was shot at. And they told me that my claim was not real because I didn't have enough evidence. As she was in tears, she was bawling, and she looked at me. Was I supposed to go up to my killers and ask them if they can sign a paper that says that they are trying to kill me because of this, this, and this, and sign it, date it, and give it back to me so that when I go seek asylum, that I have credible? I have credibility in my claims. It is absurd. And we're seeing that we're still in a system where Border Patrol agents have so much power up hand that some folks don't even make it to an immigration judge because the Border Patrol agents are judge and executioner right there. And that is a horrific part of our system that is still happening and unchanged. And this, my friends, is not Trump. This is Biden right now. It's happening right now. This is continuing to happen right now.
I would also point out, and this goes back for the last 20 years of migration, case after case. Much of the problems we have were created by US policy. The great migration out of the south of Mexico was a result of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which what happened in the south of Mexico, and this is very similar to what happens in the mountains of Guatemala, you had farmers, small farmers on very small plots of land, 5-10 acres at most, and you had a husband, wife, and 5 kids. And US trade policy brought cheap corn into the country, corn at half the price of what this person could produce it at. So now the farmer loses his land. Well, if a man and a woman and their children lose their land, lose their livelihood, what they're going to do in the Triangle countries and in the south of Mexico is they're going to send 1 or 2 of those kids north because they're going to try to come north to get a job in order to send money back to keep people alive. Now that system hasn't changed. The U.S. One of the problems happening in Honduras is they're clearing massive amounts of land that people used to grow crops on because they want to have more beef on that land for Burger King. And so it's corporate agriculture dominating the economies of sometimes agriculture, it's others too. The problems that the coffee growers in Guatemala are having is similar. So what I'm saying is, yes, the environment is creating some of these problems, but it's also our trade policies that are creating these policies. One of the ways the Honduran refugees often say it is they say, we're here because you're there. That is, we came to the United States because the United States came to Honduras and made our life unlivable there. So that's why we're here. That's why we're here trying to make a living. And I put up that little recent quote from the Pope, but the basic policy going back over 80 years in the Catholic Church is that, and I don't have the exact quote on this, but the basic policy is, basic decision of all teaching is that a person has a right to move to any place on earth they need to work to feed their family. And therefore, immigration policy has to adjust to that. That's the faith teaching in the Catholic community.
Definitely, and I think it's so. I want to uplift what you said about how like migration is not just one issue. It's a cyclicalness of how systems work together to perpetuate migration at times, right? It's not just an environmental issue, but we also know that it's an issue with our private prison system that is here in the United States. We know that the issue and violence that happens in El Salvador with MS-13 was perpetuated by the United States in California when folks from MS-13 were deported back to El Salvador, back to an already struggling nation who was trying to build up, who was trying to come back in, and were brought upon with these issues. So we know that migration is not just one issue, my friends. It is supported by a plethora of different things that circulate. And that's why when I advocate for the horrificness with our private prison system here, I do it because I also acknowledge that it affects everything, that we work under a system of systems of oppression that are cyclical, that one thing affects the other thing. And we understand that we can't just have tunnel vision and hyper focusing on one thing without acknowledging the rest of those things that are happening that perpetuate the migration and the suffering of communities and families, and also shows how racism is still intact, because we haven't even talked about our black folks who are oftentimes treated even worse. We know that Haitians are still being deported on a higher exponential rate. We know that ICE has been targeting black folks on a higher rate to deport. And these are conversations where we think that migration looks like me. We think that migration talks and looks like me because I look like what everybody thinks that migration looks like. But migration does not look like me. Migration is as to me, migration is just like in the animal kingdom. It can be butterflies, it can be birds, it can be whales, it could be fish. It is so unique in its aspect and its forms of who and what it comes and looks like. So migration does not look like me, and our advocacy should not just hyper focus on folks that look like me. It should be in a way that is conscious about how we think about different systems of oppression and how they come together, and as well to uplift the voices of those who are, even within an oppressive system, are even more oppressed, like our Black community.
And just to add to that, because Eddie mentioned the MS-13 experience, a significant part of the MS-13 experience was migrants who came to the Los Angeles area fleeing the Civil War, that we funded one side of that Civil War, and then they were not dealt with. The kids were not dealt with. They were illegal, so they weren't allowed to come into our society. They weren't treated as valuable human beings, and so they ended up in juvenile hall, and they ended up becoming what we now call MS-13. But that didn't have to happen. If we had treated those migrants with dignity and respect, that whole generation of MS-13 didn't need to happen. That was created by our refusal to deal with refugees in a humane and reasonable way, including young people. Let's see, I see we have a question. Okay.
Yeah, this is, as a Jew, I face so much colonial Christianity, and I see it so much even within immigration. And I think that there's a point where are we looking to convert, or are we looking to actually support the people? And we see that folks who are still doing these mission trips, right, going down to Central and South America, and saying they're supporting people, but that's not what's actually happening. And we actually come back and we see folks who are really upset with the fact that they were like, you know what, some people came, but they didn't really help us. They just told us that we needed to convert. And this is really hurtful. This is counterproductive. Granted, I'm not talking about the communities of Christian communities that have really showed an amazing role of support into the supporting of asylum seeking families, and the supporting of creating a new migration system that works collectively for everybody. But we still know that we live in a Christian centric society that upholds and pushes for those values, that really pushes down other communities, especially speaking indigenous communities that have they're almost eradicated their entire identity and push towards a new colonialization of Christianity. And that's been a struggle where I have personally felt and seen folks who are indigenous and native to Central and South America come and talk about the pain that they felt of folks being forced to convert. If they wanted any support, they had to convert. So we really need to take a step back and acknowledge, are we helping the people because it's the right thing to do, or are we supporting the people to uplift our faith and theological value? What is it that we're doing? I believe that faith should be the fuel to why we act, but it should not be the purpose onto why we act. It shouldn't be the reason to have to make everybody else see the faith that you see. Instead, we should use our faith to help the folks in need, help the folks in the struggle, help the folks and uplift their lives. That's what faith should be leading us to, not to just chronologically grow and exponentially grow, but to really grow the humanity in our people and use the faith in our teachings to make sure that that's fueled.
And Don, I don't know if you were at the opening session of the workshop today, but one of the speakers did a really good job talking in response to your question about the negative role. Particularly, his example was the evangelical Christians mobilizing in a lot of them mobilizing in a pro-Trump, pro-authoritarian fascist way. Not all of them, but many of them. And this is related to the thing called replacement theory. There's a large group of people who are creating another one of the conspiracy theories that what this whole struggle is about uh, immigrants going to replace Americans. By that, they mean white people. Uh, Immigrants are going to replace Americans, and therefore they have to fight back. And that is being organized specifically within some religious communities. That's well worth noting. It's also worth noting, as Eddie started when he first got on, um, Christianity, including Catholic Christianity, of course, was a colonial power throughout what's presently the United States and the Southwest and Mexico, um, and was horrendous. You can talk about the good things that Junipero Serra did, but you also have to recognize the indigenous people of California presently are trying to remove his statues. They protested against church teachings trying to respect him. Yes, there's a long history of colonization and oppression done by a group of missionaries, even in the Southwest. Uh, so, and what that led to is the destruction of many of the indigenous communities currently in the Southwest. The numbers are vastly under what they should have been. And then there's another whole section. This is another whole topic, but another whole section about the Christian communities that established boarding schools who took indigenous people out of their tribes and tried to make them Anglos. And that was deeply destructive to many of the tribes in the United States. So yes, you have to recognize that the Christian community in the United States and in Mexico and throughout Latin America has a great deal to take blame for, or to acknowledge and try to undo the problems that were created by that era. I don't know if anybody else wants to comment on that, but certainly you have to recognize the destructive role of Christianity in these eras. My wife is one of the Pueblo Indians, and so I happen to know this story. Other questions? We have 5 minutes left, and we have to end on time so that the next people can go on. Um, we we had planned something slightly different. We hoped that we would actually be able to have more of a dialogue. I think we've had plenty of time for the questions, but it would have been nice to have a more dialogical way to deal with it, because what we were going to ask, well, I'll put it this way. The Immigrant Rights Working Group meets it meets twice a month, once as a steering committee and once as an open meeting. And we usually ask people to share what they're doing in their local areas. And we learn there are good people all around the nation who are doing good immigrant rights work, very diverse immigrant rights work, and they're scattered. And one of the efforts of the Immigrant Rights Working Committee is to put those people in touch with each other so that they can get support, because it can be again, the opening session of the workshop, it can be not demeaning, but it can be tiring and can lead to burnout. But when you're feeling tired and burnt out, and then you hear that your comrade in another city is doing something wonderful or just got one more thing done, it's a good way to lift us up and unite us. And so that's one of the things the Immigrant Rights Working Group tries to do, is to build together these threads so that we know, because there's people working on the border, there's people working in the cities. There's a major movement in Vermont of immigrant workers. There's major organizing in Washington in the apples of indigenous immigrant workers. And so we try to share all that, and it's also shared in our uh, resource folder. So that's where we get all this. Uh, so to put in tech support, how to become a DSA member. I gave you earlier how to contact the Immigrant Rights Working Group. If you're doing immigrant rights work, we'd like you to be in touch with us. Our particular direction with the working group is to align ourselves very closely with immigrant communities and immigrant rights working groups, immigrant rights groups led by immigrants. And so that's what we're trying to do. And we invite you to join us and to be with us. Any final comments?
Thank you, Duane. It looks like we do have up to 2:45, but Eastern Standard Time. But if folks feel comfortable where the conversation is at, and if folks feel like they want to hear more, keep asking questions. If not, we can, I think, peacefully end here. I think that another thing that to one final thought for me is that we shouldn't just have these conversations with us, but we should actually look to have conversations with folks who don't agree with us. Because oftentimes in the progressive movement, we just preach to each other, and like we kind of just validate each other's ideas, right? And I think that there's definitely space for that, right? Like there's definitely space to elevate each other and in community, but we need to start to shift the rhetoric and around immigration and itself, and that comes from going after having those tough conversations with people who don't agree with us. Oftentimes I have to have conversations with very far right folks on my own faith who don't agree with me, who do not see what I see. And I try to invoke language that shows folks the entirety of what it looks like. I can only imagine how many Jewish families were here if they weren't denied entry into the United States during the Holocaust and World War II. Like, I can only imagine how many families would still be alive, you know. So we fully understand that, and we fully know that to create change, we have to bring around the to create true tangible change, we have to change the minds of the unaffected. That's where we start to create change. And so I really encourage all of you who are watching this, listening to this, or will watch or listen to this, to get out and try to have tough conversations with folks who don't agree with you, because that's where we start to shake things. That's where we start to really bend and break things, and we start to mold into a new society that works for all of us.
So we're really happy that the Religion and Socialism working group hosted this conference today. We in the Immigrant Rights Working Group also have webinars. You can get a hold of us as we provided you with the link. And we urge all the parts. I mean, DSA is a massive organization with many parts to it. And what we have to understand, people are doing absolutely great things, like the people working on the PRO Act, trying to get labor relations improved. We in immigrant rights are saying we want those people on H-2A to be covered by the National Labor Relations Act. So there's multiple campaigns within DSA, and I would urge people to get involved with them, with the ones that are closest to you. Some reflection back some time ago, I was working with some of the members of the NPC. This was a long time ago, and they were saying, "Well, Duane, what do you want? How do you want to get people involved? How do people get involved in a struggle?" And I said, "Well, what you really have to do is not talk about it. You have to go work with somebody. Go find the place where you can go do the work, whatever the work is you can do, and then work with respect side by side with the people who are doing the work, whether it's border work or it's sanctuary work or it's legal work. But do the work side by side, or as many of the people in liberation theology used to say, you make the road by walking. So if we work together, then we'll learn from each other. And as we learn from each other, we will become, that's how we produce hope and positivity in our work, instead of just being grumpy old lefties. So thank you all for coming. I see, well, let's share with these questions, because Mark has made some comments here we can share with everybody. Thank you for acknowledging that not all evangelical Christians are reactionary. They certainly are. There's, I should have mentioned in that, please get in touch with the Poor People's Campaign, which was covered in the original workshop. And the Poor People's Campaign does excellent immigrant rights work, as well as, and it's faith-based people. So I really encourage you to look into the Poor People's Campaign. And this Mark says, I just agreed to lead an immigrant justice ministry in Glendale City Church in Los Angeles area. There are good things happening. What should be my next steps? Actually, if you contact the Immigrant Rights Working Group, we'll send you a link to our folder. And our folder has a thing called 8 steps. It's 8 steps to get started. And it's practical as could be. Do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So contact us through that email list. We'll send you a link to 8 steps to getting started. And that would be my answer to that question. So thanks to all. Thanks for coming, and let's keep this thing going. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference. Bye.